Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where we're going to add some more elements into our firefight. As usual with these basics videos, although I'm filming this in Shock Force 2, the principles and controls are all either tactically sound or game engine mechanics, so they all apply to the other Combat Mission titles as well. And like in the last video, I'm filming this entirely in the Steam version, which has been a little bit delayed. It should be coming out on the 1st of September now, but this is entirely at Steam's end, and the game is just as functional as it was last week. Last time we had a very simple firefight with two squads facing off against each other, and although the Americans managed to win, they had pretty much run through their ammunition by the end, leaving them victorious but combat ineffective. So this time we're going to give them some backup. Our US rifle squad is always going to be part of a larger platoon in combat missions, so I've brought the platoon HQ with the flag icon out of hiding, and because we need a bit more firepower, I've attached a medium machine gun team, which has a pretty self-explanatory machine gun icon. We're in the deployment phase here, so the battle hasn't started yet, and we can move our force around inside this blue area as much as we like before starting to give out orders. This gives us some options, and given that walking straight up the road like we did in the last video isn't very smart, we can try something different. Our rifle squad is the only element we've got that can really go forward close with and destroy the enemy. It's the one with the most close range firepower and the most bodies to soak up the inevitable casualties. So once again, they're the ones who are going to be heading for the objective. The platoon HQ and the MMG team aren't very well suited to that, but they do have 4 pairs of binoculars between them, so they should be good at spotting the enemy, and they've got an M240 Bravo machine gun. The M240 fires a bigger bullet than the rifle squad's weapons, the NATO 7.6mm round instead of the 5.56. This carries further and hits harder, so it's more effective at longer ranges, especially when mounted on its tripod, which provides an extremely stable firing platform. So these two teams together give us a spotting firepower element that we can use to support the rifle squad as it moves forward. They need to be in a good position for this. The higher ground to the right of the road should do nicely. To get there nice and fast, we can move them to the nearest section of our deployment zone, and because when we check the route down at ground level it looks like they'll be in cover behind the slope, we can jog them up there using quick instead of move and save some time. Meanwhile, our squad of Syrian militia is setting up in pretty much the same place as before, and like in the last video, I'm not going to be issuing any commands to this squad, though we are going to see things from the Syrians' perspective later on. On turn 1, nobody sees anything. All 3 US elements are still getting into position behind the slope. On the right, the MG team is definitely going to be getting where we want it on the next turn, so we can give it orders to set up and get ready to provide fire support. To do this, we need to order it into the right place. We're going to go for the rocky ground just here, select that waypoint and use the deploy weapon command. This tells the team to set the M240 up on its tripod when it's reached that waypoint, which will make it much more effective. As the next turn rolls, we can watch our M240 team move up, go prone and then start to deploy. The Syrians have spotted them and the RPD gunner is giving them a few bursts, but he's off target for the time being. Our MG team is reorganising itself as it deploys too. The gunner has moved back to a slightly better position, the number 2 is crawling over to help feed the weapon, and the 3rd soldier is spotting with his binoculars. We can also see the actions of each pixel truppen changing on the left as they go through the motions. By the end of the turn, our M240 is all set up. The gunner is having a moment because he's being shot at, but the weapon is now on its tripod and the text over its silhouette has disappeared to indicate that it's deployed and ready to go. While that was all going on, our US force has spotted the Syrians. Somewhat ironically, it was the rifle squad who spotted them first, but it's important to note that all 3 US elements can see different things and have different information. The rifle squad can only see a Syrian with an RPG, the MG team can only see the RPD gunner, and the platoon HQ can see the RPD gunner and a random soldier with an AKM. Regardless, we've got a location for the enemy, and with the M240 setup we can start to engage them. The MMG does have a solid contact for the Syrians, so we could target them directly like we did in the last video, but the problem with that is that if our MG team loses the spot, which could very easily happen with an infantry target 500 meters away, it will stop shooting. So instead, I'm going to target the ground where the enemy is and engage in some area fire. The MG will still try and engage any actual targets it spots in that general area, but if it loses sight of the enemy, it will continue putting fire on that location. The M240 opens up and the incoming RPG fire stops immediately. The Syrians all go prone, with some of them starting to cower. The MG team has gotten the Syrians ducking much faster and much more effectively than the rifle squad did in the last video, mostly because the fire the machine gun can put out in the sustained fire roll is much more accurate. We can see that the bursts fired from the MG team are very tight, with all the rounds landing around the same point. This is to do with a combination of factors that make the M240 suited to this role. The weapon is firing a heavier round that performs better at range, it's mounted on a tripod, the gunner is prone, he has a spotter to correct him onto the target, and because he's going to be staying in a stationary position, he doesn't have to keep readjusting his sights as he gets closer. Down by the road, I've split the rifle squad and started bounding forwards again, ordering the stationary team to fire on the enemy like in the last video. This has led one of the saw gunners to open fire, and looking at where his rounds are going, it's easy to see why the M240 is more effective. The M249 here has a shorter barrel and is firing a lighter, less powerful round from a much less stable kneeling position, and as a result, the rounds are going pretty much everywhere. So now we're pretty much into what we were doing in the last firefight with these different elements. The enemy isn't within effective killing range of any of our weapons yet, so our rifle squad is advancing to close the distance. The big difference now is that the MG team is doing the hard work of keeping the Syrians suppressed, which is allowing the infantry to not only preserve their ammunition, I've got them on target light instead of target, but they're able to take longer bounds and generally move forward faster. There's less risk involved doing it this way because the MG is keeping their heads down in a more effective way. The enemy is still occasionally getting some rounds off. The M240 has to reload every now and again after all, and the Alpha Team Grenadier takes a hit. Luckily he's only lightly wounded so he can carry on. Chances are his body armor saved him. Body armour isn't a luxury that the Syrian army really has, and soon the rifle squad is within M203 range and the Syrians quickly start to take casualties. This Syrian militia squad is in a very bad position. They're suppressed and pinned down in the open, with the advancing US infantry now within 300 meters, the distance where their small arms start to quickly increase in effectiveness. It doesn't take long for them all to get killed, and our US rifle squad can move up to occupy the crossroads objective. The M240 has used up over 600 of its original 800 rounds, but all that fire has kept the enemy's heads down and allowed the rifle squad to close in and finish them off without using up all of their own ammunition. To put it another way, we've made use of a two-part force. The M240 and the platoon HQ formed a base of fire, which suppressed the Syrians, and the rifle squad formed a maneuver element that we used to destroy them. This concept of having a fire support element and a maneuver element is pretty much the bedrock of infantry tactics. We can't move safely unless the enemy is suppressed, and we can't suppress the enemy effectively while we're moving. So we need to have these two elements working in concert until the effectiveness of our fire gets to a level where the enemy is killed, forced to run away, or surrenders. It is possible to engage in this kind of fire and movement organically with basic infantry units like rifle squads, as we did in the last video, but as we've seen here, it's much more effective when the fire support element is made up of specialist units like our MG team. It's also important to note that although we had a separate base of fire, we were still using that organic fire and movement to advance with the rifle squad. In a similar vein, if we needed to, we could have had the rifle squad stop and put fire on the enemy, while the MG team moved forwards to gain a better firing position. We're not dealing with rigid concepts here, there's plenty of flexibility. So, now that the enemy has been destroyed, we're going to stop the M240 team from firing by using the clear target command. They won't stop firing on their own because in this case we had them engaging in area fire. And then we're going to push the infantry up to occupy the objective. Unfortunately for our victorious rifle squad, they're not as victorious as they think they are. It should be pretty obvious by now that trying to defend the crossroads by lying in the open in front of it is probably not the best way for the Syrians to approach this. They've also gotten some reinforcements for this fight, and they've been waiting patiently for this exact moment. As soon as the Americans are in the kill zone, the trap is sprung. the squad-sized militia platoon HQ and a Dushka heavy machine gun open up from the flank at about 200 meters. This is a very different breed of firefight. The Syrians have the US exactly where they want them, using concealment, surprise, and the rapid, intense concentration of firepower at short range to decimate them. And there is very, very little the Americans can do about this. The rifle squad itself is quickly pinned down and destroyed, caught out in the open with no cover, concealment, or support. Our base of fire element can't draw line of sight to the Syrian positions to suppress them, even if we had time to give them any orders. The Syrians don't have to physically sit on the objective here to defend it. The ground around the crossroads is so flat and featureless that it's pretty much fundamentally unsafe. But the same ground that makes it a dangerous position to hold also makes it a dangerous position to attack, and by using the cover and concealment of this compound, the Syrians could dominate the objective with fire, stopping the US from reaching it despite being 200 meters away. The use of surprise, cover and concealment is also critical, because this Syrian element in the compound here is essentially safe from the Americans' firepower until it chooses to reveal itself. And if it can reveal itself on its own terms, then the US are going to have a bad day. So along with this concept of fire and movement, we also have to contend with the terrain and how we and the enemy can exploit it. There's no way our US force can storm that compound now, it's taken too many casualties. So it's back to the drawing board. In the next video, we'll bring along some more toys and have another crack at it. Until then, hope you guys enjoyed this and found it useful. I'll see you in the next one.